the temple got burned down by the soldiers of Titus, and after the battles ended, Titus and his army, his engineering forces, intentionally ruined the entire city of Jerusalem, as well as the focal point of Jerusalem, that's the Temple Mount, which is the heart, soul, and spirit of Jerusalem.
Beneath the golden sunlight of Jerusalem, a technology once confined to laboratories and science fiction stories has been turned toward one of the most contested and sacred pieces of land on Earth. The Temple Mount, revered by billions, has recently been scanned in unprecedented detail by a sophisticated artificial intelligence system. It was not merely a case of satellites sweeping over rooftops or ground-penetrating radar mapping stone. This was a convergence of machine learning, spectral imaging, and predictive modeling, all fused into a tool capable of peeling back layers of history without lifting a single stone. When the results were first processed and revealed on computer screens, the scientists overseeing the project were visibly shaken, some even turning pale at the enormity of what they had uncovered. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The Temple Mount has been measured, drawn, excavated at its edges, and fiercely debated for centuries, but never before has its hidden architecture been subjected to such a penetrating digital analysis. The AI did more than photograph the visible structures. It interpreted faint vibrations in the earth, subtle mineral inconsistencies, and minute differences in thermal readings to construct a deep structural model of what lies below. The Temple Mount has always been seen as a palimpsest of civilizations: Canaanite, Israelite, Roman, Byzantine, Islamic, and Ottoman, and the AI appeared to trace these layers as if it were slicing through time itself. For the researchers, many of whom had spent their careers studying scraps of ancient records, pottery shards, and carefully restricted archaeological trenches, the sudden flood of clarity was overwhelming. The machine revealed subterranean passages, long collapsed chambers, and symmetrical voids that suggested intentional construction. These were not random gaps in the rock, but alignments hinting at forgotten architecture buried below the visible platform. Some patterns bore resemblance to descriptions preserved in medieval manuscripts, texts often dismissed as mythological or allegorical. What made the scientists pale was not only the confirmation of certain long-debated theories, but also the revelation of entirely unexpected structures, ones for which there is no record, no precedent, no explanation in known history. The AI suggested the presence of chambers that might predate the Second Temple, perhaps even structures older than the first. The implications stretched beyond archaeology. Artificial intelligence had become a tool capable of rendering the invisible visible, not by guesswork but through the synthesis of petabytes of cross-referenced data. Each layer of stone, each microfissure, each grain of mineral composition was correlated with known patterns of human building practices. The AI was not merely detecting shapes, it was interpreting intent, extrapolating architectural logic, and reconstructing floor plans of buildings erased by centuries of rebuilding and conflict. Scientists accustomed to painstaking manual reconstructions suddenly found themselves looking at blueprints of subterranean complexes with a clarity that felt almost intrusive. It was as if the Earth itself had been persuaded to confess its secrets. As the AI's models rotated on holographic displays, the researchers confronted a sobering reality. The Temple Mount was not a static relic of the past, but a living archive with deeper strata than anyone had imagined. The digital reconstruction showed stairways descending into the bedrock, intersecting tunnels that suggested ceremonial or defensive use, and chambers whose proportions echoed mathematical harmonies common in sacred architecture across civilizations. Some scholars whispered that the symmetries suggested knowledge of geometrical systems predating Greek influence, a revelation that could rewrite the story of ancient learning. Others worried aloud about what confirmation of such structures might ignite in the political and religious landscape of Jerusalem. Yet at this stage, the scientists were not thinking of aftermaths or public controversies. Their focus was on the staggering immediacy of the data itself. They had spent years operating within the margins of speculation, carefully constrained by the impossibility of large-scale excavation in such a contested site. Suddenly, without a single shovel, they possessed a map that pierced the ground more thoroughly than any dig could. The AI did not destroy or disturb the fragile layers of history. It preserved them digitally, allowing analysis without desecration. That alone was enough to make even the most skeptical scholars marvel. What startled them most was the AI's ability to highlight anomalies no human eye could have detected. Tiny inconsistencies in the density of stone flagged the likelihood of sealed corridors. Variations in the chemical composition of mortar suggested phases of construction unknown to traditional archaeology. Certain voids seemed deliberately filled and disguised, raising questions about intentional concealment. The scientists recognized that such concealment pointed not to ordinary structural collapse, but to deliberate acts of burial, as if someone in antiquity had intended these chambers to remain hidden. The pale faces around the monitors reflected the dawning comprehension that they were witnessing history folding open in real time. They were no longer limited to fragments of inscriptions or the contested testimonies of chroniclers. Instead, they had a coherent three-dimensional vision of hidden architecture lying just below the surface of one of the most sacred and sensitive sites on the planet. The AI was not revealing a single narrative, it was offering a kaleidoscope of possibilities, each demanding re-evaluation of long-held assumptions about the Temple Mount's past. The magnitude of the discovery was not simply in the structures revealed, but in the method itself. If AI could so precisely map the invisible beneath the Temple Mount, then every ancient city, every buried temple, every lost civilization could theoretically be reimagined without destructive excavation. The technology was as much a revolution in archaeology as the microscope was in biology. For the scientists, that thought alone sent a shiver down their spines. They had glimpsed the future of historical research, one in which stone and soil yield their stories willingly under the gaze of algorithms. And yet, it was the specific case of the Temple Mount that made their reaction so visceral. This was no ordinary ruin. Every stone of the mount carries meaning. Every rumor of what lies beneath has the potential to reshape identities and beliefs. The AI's revelations could not be measured in academic terms alone. Even without considering what might come next, the scientists were struck by the profound weight of the moment. They had unlocked a hidden architecture whose existence had only been hinted at through myth and speculation, and now those myths were colliding with digital certainty. The silence that followed the unveiling of the data was heavy. These were individuals trained to interpret, to debate, to argue over evidence. Yet in the face of this overwhelming clarity, they found themselves momentarily without words. Each scientist understood instinctively that they stood on the threshold of something far larger than their own careers or disciplines. The pale faces were not only a reaction to the startling images, but to the recognition of responsibility. To see was to know, and to know was to carry the weight of knowledge that could not easily be contained. What they had uncovered was not a neat confirmation of existing theories, but a challenge to the very framework of how history of the Temple Mount was understood. The AI had laid bare layers of human activity stretching far deeper than expected, demanding reinterpretation of timelines, architectural traditions, and cultural influences. For decades, debates had hinged on whether remnants of the First Temple survived beneath the Second, whether Roman modifications erased Israelite traces, or whether Islamic rebuilding obliterated what came before. The AI suggested that the answers were not simple binaries, but a complex stratigraphy of coexistence, destruction, and intentional concealment. The images glowed on their screens, chambers aligned with cosmic markers, staircases leading into sealed darkness, underground vaults sealed with materials not used in known regional construction practices. These were not casual anomalies. They were deliberate, crafted, purposeful. The AI had shown them that beneath the Temple Mount, human intention had been written into stone in ways no one had previously grasped. The scientists sat in awe, their pallor reflecting not only shock, but reverence at the depth of the mystery unfurling before them. And so, the scanning of the Temple Mount by AI did not end with a triumphant declaration or a tidy conclusion. It ended with silence, pale faces, and the weight of revelation pressing into the room. They had not uncovered artifacts they could hold, nor scrolls they could read, nor treasures they could display. What they had uncovered was deeper, the undeniable presence of something hidden, something carefully crafted, something that redefined their understanding of one of the holiest places on earth. The Temple Mount, long studied, long debated, had spoken in the language of data, and its voice left the scientists trembling. Under the hushed air of the laboratory where the data was first compiled, The sense of revelation only grew as the hours wore on. What had begun as a project in high-resolution archaeological mapping had morphed into an encounter with something far beyond the ordinary. The scientists who had overseen the scanning of the Temple Mount found themselves leaning closer to their screens, adjusting their eyes as though the glowing holographic projections could not possibly be real. They had seen anomalies in ruins before, hints of cavities beneath stone or uneven subsurface textures, but this was different. The AI was not presenting rough guesses or indistinct blurs. It was presenting clarity, mathematical, undeniable, and chilling in its precision. The deeper they explored the data layers, the more it seemed as though the Temple Mount itself had been waiting for this moment, waiting to be peeled back by a tool capable of perceiving what no human hand could uncover. There were no picks, no shovels, no dust rising from excavation trenches. There was only silence, punctuated by the hum of servers and the flickering light of projection displays, while the oldest mysteries of one of the most revered sites on Earth unfolded with startling immediacy. The AI models were constructed from multiple streams of input: radar tomography, ground-based LiDAR, seismic readings, and multispectrum satellite data. Each of these on their own had once produced confusing, partial glimpses of what lay beneath. Combined and placed under the scrutiny of a self-learning system designed to find coherence in chaos, they produced a model so complete it was as though the mount had been made transparent. The scientists watched cross-sections rotate, with sublevels appearing like stacked architectural drawings of cities lost to time. At the edges of the subterranean maps, one detail stunned them into stillness: a circular chamber deep in the bedrock, its dimensions perfectly symmetrical, aligned with the cardinal directions in a way that seemed intentional. The AI flagged it as highly anomalous, unlike natural formations, and highlighted pathways that seemed to lead toward it from multiple directions. This chamber was not mentioned in any ancient records they knew, nor in the countless conjectures of medieval chroniclers. Its existence was entirely new, and the implications were staggering. To discover a structure of such sophistication beneath the Temple Mount suggested that a chapter of human history had slipped entirely into silence, hidden for millennia and unseen until now. Even more startling was the AI's reconstruction of what appeared to be staircases, cut not crudely but with deliberate angles, connecting what looked like different phases of construction. These were not mere utilitarian steps. Their proportions suggested ceremonial use. They descended with a rhythm consistent with processional movement, wide enough for groups rather than individuals. This indicated that whatever activity once took place below the surface was not secretive in nature, but perhaps communal, a gathering of people moving toward a purpose now forgotten. The scientists were trained to resist leaps of imagination, but the images pulled at their thoughts relentlessly. A ceremonial stairway leading to a hidden chamber aligned with the stars could not be dismissed as coincidence. And yet, without physical excavation, no artifact could confirm it. What they had was data, a kind of spectral blueprint carved in silence by algorithms, but the weight of the evidence was too great to ignore. As they pushed the analysis further, the AI began correlating material densities with known construction phases. Certain chambers showed signs of infill that was chemically different from the surrounding stone, indicating that they had been deliberately sealed. The system highlighted these anomalies in crimson red, pulsing like warnings on the screen. To the researchers, it was clear that someone, long ago, had wanted to obscure or bury sections of the underground network. The deliberate concealment spoke volumes. History had not merely covered these structures by accident, it had hidden them with intent. The realization swept across the group. The Temple Mount was more than a sacred plateau layered with surface monuments. It was a multi-dimensional puzzle in stone, with secrets deliberately locked away. The AI had turned the key. The pale expressions of the scientists were born from an understanding that what they were seeing was not simply a matter of heritage or ancient architecture, but of deliberate acts of preservation and concealment by people who had lived thousands of years earlier. As the hours turned into days of analysis, the AI uncovered even more. Deep beneath the known foundations, there were vault-like structures, rectangular and aligned in grids. Their dimensions bore striking similarity to storage or archive chambers. Some of the researchers speculated that these could have once held sacred texts or objects, perhaps materials too fragile to have survived the passing centuries, but whose architecture indicated their original purpose. It was this possibility that caused the deepest unease among the scientists. The notion that beneath the Temple Mount, humanity had once stored objects or knowledge considered of such significance that it warranted burial in elaborate hidden repositories. What made the discovery uniquely unsettling was the AI's ability to extrapolate not only the outlines of these chambers, but also the patterns of wear and collapse. It revealed places where ceilings had fallen, places where tunnels had been deliberately filled, and areas where seismic events appeared to have altered the terrain. Each of these moments in the subsurface record corresponded to epochs of upheaval known from history: conquests, earthquakes, rebuildings. The AI was effectively narrating the history of the Temple Mount in silent geometries, showing the scars of events that had reshaped civilizations. The scientists felt as though they were being pulled into a dialogue across millennia. The chambers spoke of intent, the collapses spoke of violence, the sealed corridors spoke of caution, and the symmetrical geometries spoke of a worldview that had once aligned stone with the cosmos. To sit in a modern lab surrounded by glowing screens and realize that all of this had lain hidden beneath their feet was a revelation so profound that the physical sensation of awe coursed through their bodies. Their paleness was not fear of the unknown, but awe of the undeniable. What came next was perhaps the most astonishing. The AI had been designed not merely to detect, but to learn, to adapt its models based on what it was finding. With each layer it reconstructed, it adjusted its parameters, refining its ability to detect architectural intent. Soon it began to identify patterns that repeated across the mount, rhythms of construction that suggested not random building over time, but a grand design carried through multiple eras. These were not disconnected projects of successive rulers, but parts of a larger, enduring vision. This revelation left the researchers breathless. The Temple Mount had always been seen as a contested space torn between empires and faiths, destroyed and rebuilt in cycles of conquest. But the AI suggested continuity, a guiding principle threading through the centuries, carried forward even as civilizations rose and fell. To see this continuity emerge in the data was to glimpse an unbroken thread of human ambition, one that transcended the divisions of history. The scientists exchanged glances, their faces pale not only from the enormity of discovery, but from the recognition that they were peering into intentions larger than any single era or culture. The Temple Mount had not only been the stage of history, but its anchor, its design echoing across millennia with uncanny consistency. The AI had revealed that what seemed like chaotic rebuilding was in fact the unfolding of a vision, perhaps so ancient that no surviving text remembered it, but preserved in stone as faithfully as if inscribed on parchment. Among the many layers uncovered, one detail in particular captured the collective breath of the researchers. Deep beneath the central platform, aligned with almost mathematical perfection, the AI reconstructed the outline of a chamber unlike any other. Its proportions matched no known structure in the region. The walls, inferred from density patterns, appeared unnaturally smooth, suggesting advanced techniques. The AI marked its alignment with the solstices, highlighting shafts that may once have allowed beams of sunlight to penetrate into its depths during specific days of the year. It was not the chamber's dimensions that unnerved the scientists, but its silence in history. No text, no chronicle, no oral tradition had ever spoken of such a place. For a structure of this significance to exist without record defied everything they had been taught about how civilizations remembered themselves. To know of its existence was to realize that an entire layer of history had been wiped clean, and that the Temple Mount was holding it intact like a secret heartbeat in stone. The room fell quiet as the models spun and paused, the glowing chamber hovering in digital space. Some scientists leaned back in their chairs, others pressed their hands to their faces, pale with realization. They were not merely dealing with archaeology, they were standing before a revelation that rewrote the boundaries of memory itself. The AI did not pause for breath, of course. It continued, compiling connections, highlighting alignments, extrapolating sequences. But the humans who watched it sat transfixed, recognizing that they had crossed a threshold. The Temple Mount was no longer just a sacred hilltop of layered sanctuaries. It was a vast, intentional archive of human thought, encoded in stone and concealed for millennia, now brought to light by algorithms capable of deciphering what human senses never could. The implications of this moment were so vast that the scientists scarcely dared to put them into words. They had uncovered continuity where they had assumed discontinuity, intentional concealment where they had assumed natural collapse, and design where they had assumed chaos. The Temple Mount had been peeled open, not by force but by light, data, and artificial intelligence. What it revealed was not an ending, nor a resolution, but a beginning, the beginning of a new relationship with history itself. And so they sat, pale and silent, before their screens, aware that they had seen something humanity was perhaps never meant to see, yet unable to turn away. The Temple Mount had surrendered its secrets, and in doing so, it had changed forever the way human beings understood the stones upon which they walked. The laboratory that hosted the unveiling of the Temple Mount's AI scan was not meant for history-altering revelations. It was a place built for quiet precision. White walls, rows of workstations, the soft hum of cooling systems that kept the processors alive. Yet within those walls, the silence had grown thick, charged, as though even the machines recognized the weight of what was unfolding. The scientists had gone without rest, eyes fixed on rotating projections of subsurface structures. By the time the third night had slipped into dawn, exhaustion hung on their shoulders, but none dared step away. The Temple Mount was yielding itself, and to turn away felt like abandoning the greatest dialogue between past and present ever to occur. What fascinated them now was not merely the hidden chambers, but the patterns of energy flow the AI had traced through the stone. Using thermal readings and simulations, it mapped how light, sound, and heat might once have traveled through these underground passages. The model showed that in certain chambers, sound would have amplified and reverberated, creating acoustics impossible to ignore. These spaces had not been designed randomly. They were engineered to magnify voice, chant, or music. The scientists realized they were not only uncovering architecture, but environments crafted for human experience. Spaces where the invisible forces of sound and light had been manipulated with extraordinary precision. One chamber in particular caught their attention. The AI reconstructed its walls as slightly concave, angled in such a way that a single voice at its center would carry with clarity to every point within. This was not mere construction, it was performance, design with intent. It suggested gatherings where spoken words or chants reverberated in orchestrated resonance, enveloping those present in an overwhelming sensory experience. The realization brought chills. The ancients had harnessed acoustics not as entertainment, but as sacred technology, engineering spaces to amplify the human encounter with the divine. The AI then overlaid solar pathways onto its models, tracing how shafts, apertures, and alignments might have interacted with the rising and setting sun. What emerged was staggering. Certain stairways and chambers seemed aligned to receive light only at particular times of the year, solstices, equinoxes, or days significant to forgotten calendars. Light, too, had been woven into the very fabric of the mount, descending not haphazardly but with careful orchestration into hidden places below. For the scientists, the idea that underground spaces had once been bathed in controlled beams of sunlight was both eerie and awe-inspiring. It was as though the builders had sought to merge earth, stone, sky, and time into a single, unbroken ritual. This interplay of light and sound painted a picture of human intention far more complex than previously imagined. The mount was not simply a foundation upon which temples had been raised and raised. It was a dynamic instrument, tuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. The AI had revealed that it was a stage upon which celestial events had been mirrored in stone, where architecture and astronomy had once been inseparably intertwined. The scientists leaned closer as the AI extrapolated further, reconstructing possible ceremonial pathways. It suggested processions descending through hidden staircases at dawn, moving toward chambers illuminated only on the longest day of the year. It imagined voices rising in the darkness, amplified by acoustics engineered for awe, blending with beams of light piercing the underground gloom. Though the AI could not tell them the meaning of these rituals, it had exposed their possibility with unnerving clarity. The pale expressions of the researchers deepened. They were no longer looking at ruins, but at a living theater of human devotion, preserved in geometry beneath the mount. In the deeper scans, anomalies appeared that did not correspond to known architectural traditions of the region. Some walls were unnaturally smooth, as though shaped by techniques not commonly associated with the stone tools of the time. The AI flagged them with an unusual confidence score, highlighting their differences. The suggestion was not of alien intervention, as sensationalists might cry, but of lost mastery, methods of working stone that history had forgotten. These surfaces bore an almost metallic sheen in their density readings, a finish beyond the rough textures seen in typical excavations. The researchers found themselves whispering to one another, hesitant to admit that they were looking at craftsmanship whose techniques were entirely absent from the record of known civilizations. Equally perplexing were geometric voids that resembled truncated pyramids, carved downward rather than upward. Their purpose was unknown, their design alien to the Mount's otherwise recognizable architectural logic. The AI offered no definitive explanation, but correlated the shapes with structures elsewhere on Earth that had been associated with astronomical calibration. This raised the question, had the Mount once functioned not only as a religious site, but as a kind of observatory, a nexus where spiritual devotion and celestial observation merged? The more they examined, the more it seemed as though the Mount was less a building site and more a coded language, one written in architecture rather than words. Each chamber, each passage, each alignment was a symbol, layered atop and beneath one another through centuries. The scientists realized that they were reading not a structure, but a manuscript in stone, a book that had been expanded, erased, and rewritten across millennia. The AI was now the interpreter, its algorithms transforming the invisible into legible script. There was one discovery, however, that left the group unsettled in a way no other had. In the lowest detectable layers, at depths thought unreachable by human builders of antiquity, the AI detected voids with geometries that did not conform to any known cultural style. These were not simply chambers or stairways. They were immense cavities whose alignment with surface structures was too precise to be coincidental. The scientists debated furiously, voices tight with disbelief, until exhaustion forced silence. If these voids were human-made, they implied a level of engineering that should not have existed at the time. If they were natural, then the Mount's earliest builders had intentionally designed their structures in alignment with them, as if responding to the Earth itself as part of their architecture. Either possibility was enough to leave them pale and speechless. The AI's capacity for cross-comparison deepened the mystery. By referencing databases of global archaeological scans, it began suggesting similarities between the Mount's hidden structures and sites half a world away. It highlighted faint resemblances to underground complexes in Anatolia, to geometric voids beneath Mesoamerican temples, to acoustic chambers in Andean ceremonial centers. The suggestion was not that they were identical, but that the logic behind them was shared. Humanity, across vast distances, had once sought to fuse architecture with earth, sky, sound, and light. The Temple Mount, then, was not isolated but part of a broader, forgotten conversation humanity had with the cosmos. The scientists could not look away. Their exhaustion dissolved in the face of each new revelation. They were not merely uncovering the Mount's story. They were uncovering a story of human civilization itself, one that had never been recorded in any text. The AI had no sense of the weight of its findings. It merely continued to calculate, to correlate, to illuminate. But the humans watching felt as though they had stumbled into a vault not of stone but of knowledge, one that stretched across continents and ages, a vault that had waited for the arrival of minds capable of reading its silent language. For those gathered in the lab, the implications rippled inward as much as outward. To see was to question was to unravel, and to unravel was to risk collapsing the frameworks upon which their careers and studies had been built. They had spent their lives parsing fragments, piecing together shards of pottery, reconstructing walls from rubble, only to realize that beneath the Temple Mount lay intact geometries untouched by time. The pale color on their faces was the dawning recognition that their methods had been rendered obsolete in an instant, yet awe outweighed fear. Each revelation felt like stepping into the threshold of a deeper chamber, not of stone, but of understanding. The Temple Mount, revered and contested on the surface, had revealed a second self beneath, one that told its story not in words but in silence, one that had endured untouched beneath the turmoil of millennia. The AI had not just scanned stone, It had drawn back the veil on a forgotten dimension of human achievement, and the scientists sat transfixed, humbled and pale before the enormity of what they had seen. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on AI scanning the Temple Mount, uncovering shocking ancient mysteries? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.